So over the past handful of weeks, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about a very specific story, a series that has charmed the world, so to speak. Every single person that comes in contact with it ends up falling in love with it. They think it's beautiful, they think it's sweet, they think it's captivating, enthralling. So obviously I was really curious. I was happy to see a story getting this type of reception, which you don't necessarily see all too often. A story that people just really enjoy. They just love wholeheartedly. So I read it. Admittedly, I wanted to watch it as it is currently still airing, and a lot of the responses to this series' success is because of its anime, but I wanted to go back and check out the source material to see its roots, to see where it comes from, and to see if it kind of holds up to the very small slice that I have witnessed from the anime. But also just to indulge within the story, just to see what it was about and how charming it could truly be. So with all of that, let's begin. Osama Ranking, also known as Ranking of Kings, follows the story of a young boy known as Bojji, someone that is deaf and has struggle speaking. Because of this, his interaction with people is very difficult, so to speak. This is within a time that being deaf isn't all too well received or well acknowledged. Sign language does exist, people understand that he can't hear properly, but it's not as conceptually known. It's kind of looked at a little bit weirdly, more so because of the time frame that the story takes place in. Kingly, queenly, knights and shining armor type era, just based on those things, but also the architecture that the story provides. You get that sense of this is that type of era. It's also swelled together with a lot of interesting elements and things that don't exist within that era, which I'll get onto later. But Bojji is our main star, a boy that is the eldest son of a very powerful king. His father is ridiculously strong, someone that has thrived within this world and has made it his mission to be the strongest human, and once he did accomplish that, he settled down and created a kingdom for his future children. Bojji would be the first one, and already he has massive shoes to fill. He has an expectation. His father being the strongest, people expect the absolute most, the pinnacle of perfection for Bojji, and already they feel weird about him. The people of the kingdom look at Bojji in confusion that in the future this will be their new king, and they're concerned as their perception of someone that should be a king is more akin to his father, someone that is pure strength and talent and tenacity, someone that can conquer different cities and countries to their heart desires. Bojji is none of this. He's a somewhat timid, shy, but very happy and outgoing young boy, someone that struggles to communicate with people because obviously he is deaf. And while this does affect him internally, emotionally and mentally, he puts on a brave face. He stays as happy as he can be. You'll notice very quickly that there's a very drastic distinction within this world and what they value. And his younger brother, so to speak, is someone that is also next in line for the throne. Someone that the public admire, someone that the public want to be on the throne instead of Bojji. Mind you, these are just children. They're very young. They have no need to be on the throne, but because their father is extremely ill and is currently the king of this city, they need an heir. They don't know how long he's going to last. So it becomes this competition between Bojji, who isn't generally favored by the community, and his brother, Daida, someone that is the polar opposite to Bojji. Very proficient in his swordsmanship, very outgoing and tenacious, and really strives to be a very prominent, kingly individual. Someone that embodies all of these things. A lot of different things would happen, and Bojji would find himself being in a position where he wants to prove his own worth. He wants to prove to himself and to everyone else that he is a competent individual, someone that can thrive, someone that can do what they set their hearts to do. And thus, Bojji's journey actually begins, setting foot outside of the kingdom that he was born and raised in to go on a journey. But this journey is filled with some very sinister undertakings, one that puts Bojji's life in severe danger. Admittedly, this doesn't do a very clear job of what Ranking of Kings is about. It is a very simple story. It's kind of difficult, I would say, say to truly put down what the purpose of the story is, because in retrospect, it's still pretty young. It has only 30 to 40 odd chapters. I believe it's released weekly, and it's very simple in its approach to how it wants to do things. And the story more so relies on the intensity of the characters, their interactions, their personalities, and their emotions, instead of a big, over grand plot that is somewhat definitely there, but isn't as overhanging as a lot of other series. So you'll see that big bad plot, you'll see that there is all of these threads there to connect it together, but it won't be as intrusive. And this is a very interesting thing for a story like Ranking of Kings, because you have to be very careful. Our focus, our importance is the main character, and he has a lot of growth and development that you can funnel into him. A big way that this is done for Ranking of Kings is obviously through the fact that Bojji is deaf. He cannot communicate properly. He struggles to talk to people. However, he comes across an individual that originally was trying to use him, but actually befriends him. And this individual would be known as Kage. See, Kage is very similar to Bojji in a sense, at least conceptually or symbolically. He is an individual that is technically human, but also inhuman. Someone that is a shadowy figure, quite literally looks like a puddle of water, an alien substance, so to speak. Yet, this is a curse that has been put onto Kage's family that makes them look like this. In a sense, they have been outcasted because of this appearance, and they have upkept this role that has been passed down through their generations because of this figure and the fact that they can move through shadows. They are assassins, born and bred to be that. Kage comes in contact with Bojji, and at first he had a very hard exterior. He was very mean and tough on Bojji, but after a certain amount of time of taking Bojji's clothes and selling them, because obviously they were royalty and very finely crafted, he realized that Bojji already has his own difficulties, and he faces them on a daily basis, not only because of Kage, but because of other reasonings as well. One of the best things about this relationship between Kage and Bojji is not only how similar they are in a sense, but the fact that they can communicate with one another. And Kage puts in this emphasis to communicate with Bojji, someone that struggles to speak, that obviously cannot hear, and kind of just goes through the motion of reading people's lips. So Kage, being this shadowy figure, when he speaks, he specifically raises this arm out of the ground to create a very detailed and noticeable mouth for Bojji to read. You start to kind of peel back the hard exterior that Kage has and dive into the kindness that he has, the core of his being. And this kind of spirals into a very saddening backstory of where he comes from, his mother, his past, and basically what he's been through. And it's honestly a polar opposite to Bojji, but they experience very similar hardships. They experience a very similar treatment from the public. And even though Bojji is a prince, next in line to become a king, he still experiences these hardships because of something that is completely out of his control. Now, Bojji is a beautiful character, very enjoyable, very charming, just has this incredible personality to himself. It's not outlandish or super obnoxious or outgoing. It's just nice and calm and refreshing. He always wears a smile on his face. He always has a positive attitude about things, even though he recognizes and knows the hardships that he faces. This is not something that he just bypasses. Originally, it is portrayed like that he can't hear people, that he can't understand the bullying that comes his way, but he does recognize it. He does experience it, he does feel it, and Kage is the only person that sees him break down in the comfort of his own space. No one else sees this other than Kage, and it's a big reason why Kage changes his tune. Instead of bullying Bojji and contributing to that hardship, he realizes that they've been through a similar thing, and Kage confidently confirms to himself that he wants to befriend Bojji and protect him at all costs. Dynamically, these are your two main characters. They play off each other perfectly. And I was very interested on how Bojji, being a deaf character, would be played off within the manga, but it's kind of reinforced emotionally. A lot of the facial expressions kind of give you an idea of what's going on and how Bojji is feeling or how he interacts with people. Then you also have Kage and a couple of other individuals that can understand Bojji and communicate with him either using hand signs or Bojji reading their lips, and you get the dialogue repeated through them. It never comes off as being repetitive or kind of a nuisance. If anything, it's a rather interesting way to experience a story through the perspective of other people from the main character. Does that make sense? It's like it's traveling from Bojji to Kage to us as readers. Now, Kage already has an interpretation of it, so you may get a little bit of that interpretation when you see it, but you can also just kind of jump it back to Bojji and realize, well, I can see why it would be interpreted like that and why it could be potentially wrong or great to do so. What helps ground this extremely well is how expressionable Bojji is. He's a very simple child, and keyword is child. He doesn't have these nuanced thoughts or complex understanding of the world or things in general. He just goes about his everyday life. He's just learning and evolving and doing the best that he can do to live up to his father's desires, being a strong king. Now, there is some reveals in here that I don't want to spoil that directly correlate to Bojji's mishaps, the difficulties that he faces. It was kind of a very big twist within the story, and even though it was played very effortlessly and just thrown out there, it makes for a very intuitive way to weaponize Bojji's confidence. So even though Bojji could take this blame elsewhere, not on himself but to other people, instead he kind of redirects it, shifts the blame problem, and more so uses it as a strengthener for himself. He may be a child, but he wants to prove his worth. He wants to be better. He wants to do better. He wants to become a very prominent king, but in his own vision. The manga does a great job in building these relationships. What surprised me, however, is the very sinister subplot within the manga, and the artwork kind of propels this in a very weird way because it's very nice, it's very elegant, simple, it's not all too much in depth, but it does a great job in portraying the story that it wants to tell. However, because there's not much wiggle room, the sinister plot that comes in makes it very unnerving, where you don't really expect what the story could actually show you. I would assume that the anime doesn't do this, because a lot of this anxiety-driven or nervous feeling that you get for this sinister subplot is because of how the artwork is portrayed in this real, elegant, simply beautiful type of way. It almost feels out of place, but it works really well to bring this conflict to the story, especially for a child. I don't want to say what this sinister subplot is, but it feels almost too fitting where it is a little bit uncomfortable, at least within the manga front, because I just don't know how much they would show if they would do it. The anime probably has a much easier time in portraying this sinister intention because they have a lot more ways to do it. Music, artwork, sound effects, voice acting, you name it, right? The only thing you have with the manga to recognize it in such a way and kind of struggle with the severity or the range for it is the artwork itself. And because the artwork is very fine-tuned, extremely difficult to gauge. This conflict is a massive thing, however, and it will keep you on your toes when reading the chapters because you're not really sure on how deep it truly goes or why it's even here to begin with to such an extent, right? You know why it's been birthed or why the concept is even there, but you don't know what other individuals want to partake within it. Luckily, Bojji and Kage's relationship is very beautiful, it's very fruitful, and they get along really well and they protect each other. So it's very uplifting in that sense, and watching them journey and strive together is enjoyable. It's honestly just a very quality and happy friendship that they have, even though the circumstances surrounding both of them is really sad, but you could say that's what brought them together in the first place. The only real issue that I have with this story, at least on the manga front, is that it completely breezes through everything at such a confident rate. It's very common for authors to play to the audience, to the readers, to double down on explaining something or simplifying this concept or this theme or making something more obnoxious in terms of symbolism or foreshadowing, you name it, right? These are all things that the author intentionally does to make it easier or more aware for yourself as a reader. Ranking of Kings does not do this, at least in a way that feels normal. If anything, the story just progresses. It just goes with the flow, and it's very easy to get caught up within the sincerity and confidence of all of it. It's hard to really call it a legitimate negative or a complaint, but you may find yourself oftentimes lost or even confused on a lot of different things. because the story doesn't really take an extra step to explain it or simplify it for you, which isn't a fault necessarily on the author's behalf or even a fault on your behalf because you can't understand it, but more so the story doesn't really rotate around these concepts enough for it to be provided in an extra step or two. Would it help? Probably so, but is it a necessity? Not really. I think a good example I can give for the manga side of it is the world. You do not know what this world really is, other than the fact that it has kings, queens, royalty, the architecture for all of this, which kind of gives you a good idea. You then get an individual like Kage who looks like an alien creature, and this is normal. And then you have other characters that have very specific or peculiar abilities, also normal. Then you have monsters and creatures and other beings alike that is also very normal. As soon as those creatures or monsters start to come in, you start to get a better understanding for it. Obviously this takes place within its own realm and world, but it's hard to really get a sense or grasp the concept of what it's trying to go for because it doesn't really give it to you. It kind of just says here's everything within it. It's either normal or abnormal and there's no more explanation that you need. Kage is an individual that looks like a puddle of soup. This is normal. Just take it as that. This approach for some people may feel overwhelming, even confusing, even a little bit scary because it happens with a lot of different things. Once you kind of get comfortable with how the story is being told, I think the negative quote unquote side that comes with this starts to clear itself out. It's going to value itself differently for a lot of people, I assume, but if you're watching the anime, I feel like this wouldn't have much of an effect. I think the anime would flesh it out a lot more because you're seeing more of the scenery, you're hearing music probably in relation to it, and just getting a much bigger picture than what the manga actually provides. It may still do it in terms of characters or concepts in the anime, but it's a little bit easier to digest. To end this off, based on my own observation, even though I read Ranking of Kings, I would highly recommend you check out the anime and give that a try because I've heard beautiful things about it. I heard it's absolutely incredible, and just thinking of an anime production or just watching the trailer after reading the manga, the adaptation process for it is almost perfect. Now this is going to sound really weird for me to say, but I would argue that the anime is probably a better experience than the manga itself. I know it sounds like blasphemy because I am a manga fan through and through. I really love the source material and I'll always love the source material, but I'll put it like this: if you're not necessarily interested or all too hooked with the manga for Ranking of Kings, watch the anime. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with how much it has to offer, how much it brings these characters to life, and with such a level of authenticity and charm that you will fall in love with extremely quickly. It is very difficult to not like Boji as a character. It is very difficult to not appreciate and love what he brings. You're proud of him. You want to see him conquer his dreams, conquer his journey. You want to support him. I imagine the anime just fuels this even further and creates a much bigger emotional connection to him because of the voice acting, because of the music, because of the artistry that goes into it. If you want a story that is simple, fun, charming, and completely lovable, something to watch at your own pace, something that isn't action or battle shonen or dark and depressing, Osama Ranking, also known as Ranking of Kings, is entirely for you. Whether you read it or watch it, I highly recommend either or. They will both provide very beautiful experiences, and I guarantee you'll fall in love with it. End time. So with that, welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, I greatly appreciate you. Thank you. If you have read or watched Osama Ranking, I'd love to know how you feel about it. What do you think of Boji, Kage, Daida, any of the other very out there type of characters with the artistry, with the story being told, with the emotions and the highs and lows of it all? How do you feel? Has it charmed you? Have you fallen in love with it? Let me know in the comment section below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.